In the small French village of Villon-sur-Sarthe in 1714, Adeline LaRue was born with a heart too restless for the life laid out before her, a life of arranged marriage, church bells, and narrow streets that felt more like walls than pathways. From childhood, she sought freedom in the woods, in the sky, in the drawings she carved into the dirt, and in the stories told by an old woman named Estelle, who warned her never to pray to the gods that answer after dark. As the years passed and expectations closed in like a noose, Addie watched her friends marry and settle, their dreams dissolving into routine. Her parents planned her wedding to a widower she did not love, and the thought of becoming someone's possession made her feel as if she were being buried alive. On the day she was to be wed, she ran through the fields, heart pounding like war drums, ignoring the fading light and the warnings of Estelle that dusk belonged to something dangerous. Desperate, she dropped to her knees in the forest and called out to any power that would listen, begging for freedom, begging for more time, begging not to be caged by a future she did not choose. And something answered. A figure emerged from the shadows, a presence smooth as silk and cold as night, with eyes like embers and a voice that slithered through her thoughts. He asked her what she wanted, and she said she wanted to live freely, to have time that was truly hers, to belong to no one. He agreed, but every wish has a cost. In her panic, she said anything, and in her fear she did not specify the terms clearly. The moment she said yes, the air twisted, the world lurched, and the bargain was sealed. Addie returned home to find her parents staring at her blankly, unable to recognize their own daughter. She tried to speak to friends, but they looked at her like a stranger, forgetting her face the second they turned away. She tried to eat, to write, to sleep in her old bed, but nothing held. Anything she touched slipped away, was reset, erased. She could not write her name, could not hold possessions, could not be remembered by a single living soul. She had been granted freedom and time, but at the price of identity, connection, and legacy. She was not just alone, she was erased from memory itself. At first she screamed to the sky and cursed the dark god who had tricked her, but he only appeared with a sly smile and reminded her that she had agreed to the terms. He called himself Luke, and he told her that when she could no longer bear the loneliness, he would be waiting to claim her soul. But Addie refused to break. She wandered through villages and cities, stealing clothes and food when she had to, slipping through the world like smoke. She watched years turn into decades and decades turn into centuries. She lived through revolutions, wars, and plagues, saw kingdoms fall and new nations rise. She learned languages by listening, perfected the art of blending in, and survived by wit and instinct. Though no one remembered her, she found ways to leave fingerprints on history. She became a muse in the shadows, whispering melodies into the dreams of composers, ideas into the minds of painters, and phrases into the thoughts of writers. They would forget her face, but the echoes of her presence would remain in their creations. Still, every night or every decade, time blurred for her. Luke would appear, dressed in whatever form pleased him, always beautiful and terrible. He would sit across from her in the flicker of candlelight, on war-torn roads, in bustling cities, and offer her respite if she would only surrender her soul. But Addie, fueled by stubborn fire, refused him every time. She would not give him the satisfaction. She would not give him the end he wanted. As the world modernized, she adapted. She roamed across Europe, crossed oceans to America, survived by charm and instinct. She slipped into theaters, taverns, salons, trains, and hotel rooms, always meeting people who would forget her minutes later. She felt love like a spark in the dark, brief and scorching, but it vanished like smoke. Once, in the 1800s, she fell for a painter in Paris whose eyes lit up whenever she entered the room, as if his soul recognized something his memory could not. He sketched her face over and over, unable to recreate it once she stepped away. The painting he made became famous, called The Forgotten Girl, though no one knew the truth. Addie watched her reflection change with fashion and time, but her body did not age. She became fluent in the art of drifting, unseen yet unforgettable in ways no one could name. She saw the birth of electricity, the growth of cities scraping the sky, the bloodshed of world wars, and the transformation of society. She tasted joy in fleeting moments and drowned in loneliness on nights too long to contain. Yet still she refused to surrender. In the early 1900s, she met Luke again in a smoky bar in London during the Blitz. Bombs thundered overhead, and he reclined calmly with a glass of whiskey, telling her she would eventually break. She told him he underestimated her, though her voice trembled with exhaustion. He smiled, promising he would collect what was his one day, and vanished in the blink of an eye. Sometimes she tried to test the boundaries of her curse. Once she attempted to carve her name into a tree, but the letters disappeared before her eyes. Another time, she tried to confide in a priest, but as soon as she stepped outside the church, he forgot her entirely. Possessions slipped from her grasp. Stolen clothes remained only until she changed, then vanished. She could not write, could not record, could not create anything tied to her existence. But influence, that was different. She could inspire others to create in her place, and that became her rebellion. Then came the 21st century. New York City became her refuge, a place where anonymity was normal, where faces blurred in crowds and no one questioned a stranger drifting through the streets. She slept in borrowed apartments, stayed in hotels by flirting her way past receptionists, and lived on the edges of other people's lives. She frequented art galleries and bookstores, finding solace in the creations she had helped spark over the years. Luke appeared less often, either confident in his eventual victory or curious to see how long she could stretch the thread of defiance. On a rainy afternoon in 2014, Addie wandered into a small independent bookstore tucked between a cafe and a record shop. The smell of old paper and coffee wrapped around her like a memory she couldn't keep. She struck up a brief conversation with the cashier, a young man with kind eyes and a quiet melancholy about him, then slipped a book into her coat as she walked out. She had stolen books before. She never kept them long, but reading gave her a tether to the world. The next day, she returned to the store out of curiosity, a habit she rarely indulged twice. The same cashier was there, arranging shelves with absent-minded care. When he looked up and saw her, something impossible happened. He didn't blink in confusion. He didn't ask who she was. He simply said, "You were here yesterday." For a moment, Addie froze, convinced she'd misheard. No one remembered her, not for a minute, not for a breath. Yet this man was looking at her with recognition in his eyes. His name was Henry Strauss, and he remembered her face, her voice, even the shape of the conversation they'd had. Addie felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She tested him, asked him questions, left the store and came back, even bumped into him hours later. Every time, he still knew her. It was as if the rules had cracked. She didn't know whether to run or cling to the miracle. She began spending time with Henry, cautiously at first, expecting the magic to dissolve. But it didn't. They walked through the city, sat in parks, shared coffee in quiet corners. He asked about her life, and she gave him fragments, surprised each time he remembered the next day. For the first time in 300 years, she allowed herself to hope, to feel the warmth of being seen. Henry had his own shadows. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and carried a sadness, like a bruise beneath the skin. Slowly, Addie learned that he too had made a bargain. He had once felt crushing despair, convinced he was not enough for anyone, and in a moment of desperation, he wished to be loved, truly, unconditionally, completely. A dark force granted his wish, but twisted it. Everyone he met adored him, but their love was shallow, fleeting, and not real. His relationships crumbled, his sense of self eroded, and the cost of the deal was time. His life would end when the spark of false love burned out. He had only a limited number of days left, and the weight of that knowledge pressed on him like a stone. As Addie and Henry's lives intertwined, they shared their curses like wounds shown in dim candlelight. Addie told him only pieces at first, about never being remembered, about leaving no mark, but she withheld the darker centuries until trust thickened between them. Henry, in turn, confessed his fear of disappearing without ever having been truly known. They became each other's anchor in a world that didn't hold on to them. Addie felt something she hadn't allowed herself in ages: attachment. She stayed in his apartment some nights, breathing in the silence of a place where she didn't vanish the moment she left the room. She read the books on his shelves, listened to his playlists, watched him exist without forgetting she did too. And still, in the background, the echo of Luke lingered. He visited her one night in Henry's apartment, manifesting in the corner like a misplaced shadow. He taunted her gently, remarking on the novelty of watching her care for someone again. Addie stood her ground, refusing to show him fear. Luke warned her that all things borrowed must be paid back, that bargains always come due. Then he slipped away, leaving the scent of pine and smoke in the air. Henry began to notice details Addie hesitated to explain, like how she never carried identification, how she avoided cameras, how no one ever seemed to recognize her twice. One evening, as they sat on his rooftop beneath the glare of the city lights, she finally told him everything, from the village in France to the night she prayed to the wrong god, from centuries of anonymity to every visit Luke paid her in shadows and smirks. Henry listened without disbelief, because he knew what it meant to have your soul tied to a bargain you couldn't escape. He asked her what she feared most, and she said it wasn't dying, it was being gone without ever being remembered. As days passed, their bond grew into something neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. Addie helped Henry slow down, savor moments instead of counting the hours he had left. Henry, in turn, gave Addie something she hadn't felt since before her curse: the possibility of being known. But the clock on his deal was ticking. His energy began to fade, his reflection looked dimmer, and he confessed that the end was closer than he'd admitted. Addie refused to lose the one person who could remember her. Meanwhile, Luke appeared more frequently, watching from shadows, amused and intrigued. He teased Addie for playing mortal, for pretending connection meant anything when she had already lost the right to be remembered. Yet there was a flicker in his gaze, something like jealousy or fascination, whenever he saw her with Henry. Addie confronted Luke in a moment of fury, demanding to know why Henry could remember her when no one else could. Luke only smiled and said not all bargains cancel each other, and some souls are bound by threads too complex to sever. Addie spent what time she could with Henry, telling him stories of the people she'd met, the cities she'd wandered, the near-deaths she'd escaped, the fleeting loves she'd buried in her memory because no one else could hold them. She recounted nights in Parisian cafes lit by candlelight, afternoons on ships bound for America, moments on battlefields where she blended into the smoke and chaos. She told him about the painter in France, the composer in Vienna, the poet in Rome, all who had forgotten her face, but remembered the muse that haunted their thoughts. Every story stitched Henry deeper into her world, and every laugh, every touch, every word stitched him deeper into her heart. But reality loomed like a storm. Henry's time was almost up. The day his bargain was meant to end came quietly: gray sky, soft air, the city humming in the distance. Addie held him as he admitted he was scared, not of dying, but of vanishing into nothingness. For the first time in centuries, Addie considered surrendering, not to Luke, but to love. And then she made a choice. Late that night, she called out to Luke, summoning him with fury and resolve. He arrived with that familiar, infuriating calm, asking if she was finally ready to give him her soul. But Addie had other plans. She offered him a new deal: Henry's life, in exchange for something else. Luke was intrigued but cautious. Addie promised she would stay by Luke's side willingly, not surrendering her soul outright, but existing with him, in his world, on his terms, as long as Henry was freed from his bargain and allowed to live on his own path. Luke considered the offer, amused by her boldness. He agreed, but not without a reminder that she would never truly win against him. The next morning, Henry woke up and felt the shift immediately. The weight on his chest was gone, the countdown silent. He remembered everything: Addie's stories, her laughter, her past. But she was gone. Addie walked with Luke through a city she had finally begun to love, feeling the ache of sacrifice gnaw at her. Luke was pleased, confident he had finally claimed victory. But Addie, even in grief, plotted her next move. She knew that being near Luke meant opportunity. She had outwitted him for centuries. She could do it again. And she left fingerprints in the world through Henry. Henry, now free, carried her story in his memory, the one place the curse could not touch. He wrote down everything she had told him, the village, the curse, the centuries, the art she inspired. He turned her existence into pages that others could read, a legacy she had been denied for 300 years. The book, unnamed at first, became a quiet masterpiece, a story that people felt before they understood. Addie became not a face, but an idea, a spark in the imagination of strangers. And somewhere in the shadows, Luke began to realize the truth. Addie had not surrendered. She had discovered a way to be eternal without belonging to anyone. She existed in stories, in inspiration, in whispers carried across generations. Though no one remembered meeting her, she was becoming unforgettable. And she walked beside Luke with a half-smile, knowing the game was far from over. If you'd like to read the full book, the link is given in the description below.